Good morning, everyone. This is Lynn Seifert with the State Council of Higher Ed. This is the round 3 webinar for the Innovative Internship Program. Just some housekeeping issues. If you could please mute yourselves. Also, if you're on the phone listening to this, if you have to take another call, please hang up on us. Take your other call and then dial back in, because if you put us on hold, we will all hear the music that your institution plays for people on hold. If you have any questions during the session, you can use the chat box. I'll be periodically checking it. So thank you. Okay, so first, the important due dates. Proposals are due either January 20th or April 1st. We are having 2 deadlines for this, and there is no advantage or disadvantage to applying to the earlier or the later deadlines. I think we have enough money put aside to fund proposals from both deadlines. It just depends where your institution is in their thinking about experiential learning. I know some institutions have really gone quite far and developed quite a bit of what we're thinking might be part of a comprehensive plan. And so you all might be ready to just put some of that stuff in writing and get going. Others of you might want a little bit more time to kind of think about how you want to approach this. So either deadline is fine. They're due by 1 minute before midnight on the deadlines. We're hoping to make announcements around March 23rd or June 1st, and then the estimated start dates would be a couple of weeks after that. We'd like to start with giving you just a little bit of background for those of you who aren't familiar with where we are right now. In 2018, the General Assembly appropriated money in the budget to SCHEV to award grants to institutions to develop partnerships to provide paid internship opportunities for students. So it was a very clear grant competition, and that's all it was. In 2019, Senator Donovan was instrumental in introducing legislation to codify this new program, which she called the Innovative Internship Fund and Program. And then she also orchestrated a budget increase. So 2018, we had $200,000. 2019, we have $700,000. The purpose of the new program is still to expand paid and credit-bearing student internships and other work-based learning opportunities in collaboration with Virginia employers. So the theme has stayed the same. There's 2 aspects to the legislation. One is the institutional grants, and the other is a statewide initiative. And the phrasing that Senator Donovan chose to use was to facilitate the readiness of students, employers, and institutions of higher ed to participate in internship and other work-based learning opportunities. So we're really focused on this readiness aspect throughout everything that we're doing. So far what we've done with the statewide initiative during the spring and summer of 2019, we convened a policy and employer advisory panel. And the policy folks on that are members of the governor's administration for the most part. And then the employer half of that advisory panel are people who represent membership groups of employers. So for example, the Center for Nonprofit Excellence represents about 300 members, which are nonprofit organizations that have joined the Center for Nonprofit Excellence. We have the Virginia Chamber of Commerce, which represents, I think, about 26,000 businesses across the state. We have someone from U.S. Small Business Administration, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, which also represents small businesses. So we're kind of looking for, we were looking for people to help us understand, you know, the needs and the barriers that nonprofits face or that small businesses face as they try to host interns. We also conducted an environmental scan, and this consisted of us looking at other states to see what other states are doing at a statewide level. So there's lots of institutions, both in Virginia and across the country, who are doing great work in internships and experiential learning. But we were focused mostly on what's happening from the state level, what are legislatures in other states investing in, and those sorts of things. We also looked at your websites, at your institutions, to see what kind of information you provide to students and employers. One of my colleagues, Vanessa, conducted interviews with, I believe, every institution, every four-year institution, and maybe 3 or 4 community colleges to talk to you all about your internship programs. So that was the most of what we did with the environmental scam. Then we also convened the regional meetings of internship practitioners at the public institutions, and we had a few privates participate as well, and many of you were there. We learned a lot from those meetings, and I hope that you see what we learned and what we heard sort of reflected in how we're moving forward. And then we also convened regional meetings with employers. So that was sort of the counterpart to the meetings with the institutions. And what we learned is that every institution has a focus on providing experiential learning opportunities for their students. You guys have some excellent programs out there. You're doing good work, and you have really experienced staff. You're implementing national best practices. There's a lot of really good things going on. So our question is, how can a statewide initiative support what you're doing to scale these efforts while maintaining consistency and quality for students and employers? And by scale, I think we mean like tens of thousands more students participating in internships across the state. So what can we do to really bring this to scale and maintain the quality? So some of the things that we think could use some additional attention, we have 4 or 5 things on the list. And one of them is the definitions of experiential learning, internship, work-based learning. Some of them vary within your institution. They definitely vary across institutions. Employers have a different idea of what an internship might be. And so I think if we could somehow during the course of this statewide initiative over the next few years, kind of try to develop some sort of consensus on what we mean when we talk about an internship. You'll see in the call for proposals, the graphic that's on the right side of your screen. It's a little bit bigger in the paper version, so I would hope that you can see it better there. We think the statewide initiative is going to focus on kind of the bottom half of this circle, the work-based learning aspect of it. And in a few minutes, we're going to be talking about those of you who are awarded a grant from round 3 are going to be creating a comprehensive plan that has a vision for experiential learning for your students. And you all could definitely choose to address all of the aspects of experiential learning, whether it's project-based learning in the classroom, capstone projects, some of the extracurricular things that you all were telling me about, like study abroad. You know, we definitely agree that students gain valuable skills that can translate to the workplace, from serving as a resident advisor, being the president of a student club, participating in student government, some of their athletic roles. They could really be learning valuable workplace skills, but I don't believe that that's anything that we're going to be able to support from the state level. With this innovative internship fund and program, we're definitely focused on the collaboration with employers for the work-based learning, where the employer is sort of designing the project or the job description, and so that's where we'll be focused on. So when you think about developing your comprehensive plan, at the end of the grant period, for those of you who are awarded grants, you could choose to submit to us sort of a subset of your comprehensive plan that focuses on the work-based learning, even though you have a broader picture of experiential learning at your institution that includes all of those other aspects of it. You know, we'd like to know a little bit about that, but we're not going to want to have the bulk of your comprehensive plan be about, you know, project-based learning within the classroom, because we're really focused on our statewide initiative on the work-based aspect. Another thing that we think could use a little bit of attention is coordination, and this takes several, there's several aspects to this. So I think the level of coordination varies among the career services offices. Some of you have career services offices within schools, like your schools of engineering. Academic departments are coordinating internships. Some degree programs are, and then there's individual classrooms, faculty in individual classrooms who are helping their students through the internship experience. So we think that coordination could be a little bit better across your institutions. Most institutions haven't identified all the opportunities across your campus for experiential learning, and that is a monumental task, but I know that there are some of you out there who are trying to identify all the opportunities, and we've been hearing little bits and pieces that while you're doing a great job overall in terms of implementing evidence-based practices, there are some pockets of activity going on across your institutions that perhaps isn't aligned with evidence-based practices. And the other part of coordination is something that came out kind of slowly in the regional meetings, and there's definitely a focus on it here at the state level, which is that you're not all using all of the different departments across your institution that have relationships with employers. So your alumni associations and foundations, your alumni most likely work somewhere. And if there's any way to bring them into your network of potential employer partners for experiential learning, we're not sure that you're all using your alumni as robustly as you could. Your institutional advancement and development office, your fundraising arms, they have relationships with corporate partners. Your government relations offices have lots of connections to state agencies who are potential hosts for your students as interns. So those are all things that we would like to see you all at least take a look at and see during the development of your comprehensive plan if you're awarded a grant, to think about whether you're utilizing all of those connections. And the one I skipped, which I'm going to address right now, is the second one, the industry advisory councils and panels. We actually heard from our employer regional meetings. People came to those meetings who have served on advisory councils for degree programs or for schools, and they had some thoughts about how that process could be a little bit more robust. Some of them were disappointed that the advisory councils never met. Some were disappointed that when they did meet, many of the members were retired and had been away from the industry for long enough that they didn't know what the new issues are in that industry sector. And we had at least two who told us that they didn't believe that anybody should be on those councils if their employers weren't taking interns from those degree programs. So this is just some information for you all from the employer side and from some of the members of your industry advisory councils. So we're not mandating anything with this, but think about whether you're using them to the best advantage and ensuring that they are also internship hosts. The third issue is access and equity, and this is broad, but there are some institutional policies or practices that sometimes create barriers, and I heard about this in the regional meetings. The first one is equal access to information. So I would say an example of this might be that a faculty member who is teaching a course has a relationship with an employer, and students in that course go and do internships with the employer. But there are other faculty members teaching the same course, different sections of the same course, and their students don't have access to those internships. And that's just one example. I think the access to information came up in a couple of contexts. Equal opportunity to participate, a lot of this is financial. The timing of financial aid, especially I was hearing that when there are scholarships available to students to do an internship, there's something related to the way the timing of those scholarships are awarded and when the students get access to the money that isn't well aligned with the scheduling for the internship. The last thing is something that didn't come up as much in the regional meetings, but there's been a lot of talk about this here at the state level and with the policy members of our advisory committee, and that is leveraging federal work study as a source of funding for structured internships, either on or off campus. So I think most of you are aware that the federal work study program allows students to work part-time jobs off campus at nonprofits, state and local government, and get paid through the federal work study program to work off campus. And of course, they work on campus as well. And I think there's a couple of institutions around the country, Clemson, I think, is one of them, that has totally restructured a lot of their federal work study, both on campus and off campus, and they've turned those part-time jobs into internships. They have structured job descriptions that align with the learning outcomes for the degree program the student is enrolled in, and they've done a lot of work to totally reframe that. And I think that people at the policy level here in Richmond are very interested in this because this is a source of money that's coming to your institutions already. And if we can leverage that and turn those part-time jobs into structured internships that meet your academic rigor and the standards that you want for your internships, I think that could really be an equalizer, perhaps for your need-based students who maybe cannot afford to participate in an internship because they have a job and they're concerned that if they leave that job to go for an internship, even if it's a paid internship, when they come back again, they're not going to get rehired by whoever their employer is. So this is sort of something that didn't come up a lot in the regional meetings, but there's a strong interest in seeing if there's anything that we can do to leverage that money here. And then there's the student experience. It's not always consistent, you know, and I was hearing that from you all, especially for students who find their own internships, right? So a lot of times institutions have no way of knowing that a student found an internship, and so there's no way to support them and coach them and guide them through that experience. You can't prepare them for it if you don't know they're doing it. And so there's students out there that that aren't getting a lot of support, and it's not your fault, you don't know. I think there's also some students who perhaps you do know are taking internships, but their experience is not consistent. There's cost barriers. Some students need local opportunities for their internship because they can't afford to go live somewhere else for 2 months in the summer. They might have a lease on an apartment. They just can't afford to go somewhere else and pay rent in another location for their internship. And then again, the support, advising, and guidance before, during, and after. The last thing I'll mention is professional development and recognition for faculty and staff who are doing the hard work of guiding students through their internship experience. This is a labor of love, and I think that you all put in a tremendous amount of time and effort, and it's not clear to me that your institutions value that as much as they should. Experiential learning is really essential for your students, and you guys are the workhorses who are doing this. And I would just like to make sure that your institutional policies and practices are rewarding you and recognizing the value of what you're doing. So just to recap the first question that this statewide initiative is trying to address, we think that supporting you all to address those 5 elements as part of this statewide initiative could help ensure that you can affordably scale high-quality internships and other work-based learning opportunities. So if you address some of those underlying issues, then you'll be really well-positioned to just explode in terms of the number of interns the internship opportunities that your students can access. So the second question for the statewide initiative is, how can we support employers to scale their efforts while maintaining consistency and quality? And in yesterday's webinar, my colleague Wendy Kong was here, and she spoke about the next few slides, but she hasn't joined me yet, so I'll go ahead and try to speak to this issue. As part of this statewide initiative, we're planning to partner with the Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the Chamber Foundation, and regional chambers. We need to identify really thousands of new employer partners who can host work-based experiential learning opportunities. And so to do that, we need to make sure that they're ready. You can't just recruit thousands of employers who have never done internships before and somehow expect them to be evidence-based in the way they host their interns. So in collaboration with you all, we'd like to work with the Chamber to ensure that these employers are ready to offer evidence-based programs. The other thing we're hoping to partner with Chamber about is something we heard from you all at the regional meetings. There was an event called Hire Virginia, I think a couple of years ago. I believe UVA might have kind of been the lead on the logistics for it, but I think 7 or 8 institutions participated, and y'all went out to Hampton Roads. Students met with employers and they interviewed for internship positions right then during the event that day, and a lot of them got hired for internship experiences. So we'd like to see if there's some way we can partner with the Chamber and duplicate this regionally around the state and make that a regular thing. And then also, we'd like to partner with you all and with the Chamber on something that is happening in Philadelphia called Campus Philly. Some of you might be aware of what the Chamber here in Richmond is doing, Chamber RVA. They're doing some elements of what Philadelphia is doing. So I think you're all aware that one of the best practices for interns is to bring them together and have them do group activities. And for companies that only have 1 or 2 interns, it's really difficult for them to do anything like that. So Chamber RVA is offering to their membership employers in Richmond to send their interns to Chamber RVA for all sorts of events over the course of the summer. So they go to ball games, they do social events, they go to breweries, but they also have learning and leadership and workshop kinds of things for the interns. So that's one aspect of Campus Philly, but it's actually broader. And what they try to do in Philadelphia, and apparently they've had quite a bit of success, is to sell the region to the interns. So if a student comes to Richmond, for example, to go to school, what we're hearing from employers is that they hire them as summer interns, and then when the student graduates, they go home to wherever home is, whether it's another part of Virginia or whether it's back home out of state. And so they want to hire the students after they do their internship, but the students don't want to stay in Richmond. And so employers are looking for ways to sort of keep those students here. And we imagine that this could be true in other regions of the state. And we think that this is why Philadelphia chose to do this Campus Philly program. And so it's almost an economic development, selling the region to students who are interning here so that they'll stay after graduation. And so we're looking to partner with you all about that, and with Chamber, and perhaps even with Go Virginia, because it really does seem to be a regional economic development, workforce development thing that is right up the alley of Go Virginia. So we're going to be looking at that. And then otherwise, I think there's a lot of other things we could be doing with Chamber, especially regional chambers as well. We just don't know what those are yet, but we're open to all of your ideas. So leaving aside for a minute the partnership with the Chamber, there's other things we would like to do as part of the statewide initiative. And the first thing is student readiness, because if you go back again to the statute, we're talking about the readiness of institutions, the readiness of employers, and of students. And you all are doing some great work preparing your students for their internship experience and supporting them throughout the experience, and then at the end of them, helping them reflect on it and making sure that they translate what they learned onto their resume so that future employers can see the skills that they learned. But I think there's a lot of opportunities to share what you all are doing. There's no sense in an institution that perhaps isn't doing this as robustly to reinvent the wheel. We'd love to be able to share some of these and make sure that everybody has access to the same sorts of student preparation materials and information, and whatever your policies and practices are for preparing your students. We'd love to make sure that all the institutions across the state have access to everything so that they can choose what works best for their students. We'd also like to host some professional development events, even just at the regional meetings. I heard people who, were really pleased to be able to spend a couple hours with their colleagues from other institutions and share their ideas, even in those informal settings. And so we'd like to kind of bring you all together on a regular basis. And then there has to be outreach and awareness for students, parents, and employers, because if we really are going to scale internships and try to do, thousands or tens of thousands more of them, we do need sort of a standard message and some sort of marketing and outreach. And then back to the federal work study. While we're asking you all to include on your task forces as you apply for these grants, the people from your financial aid office who are involved in federal work study and who are involved in scholarships, it might not make as much sense for each of you to try to figure this out on your own. So we'd be happy to convene you all together and see if we can kind of transform this in a way that you all aren't independently trying to struggle through this process. There are also other states that have a state work study program, and I think Washington State is the most robust one that we can find. At least they publish the most information about it on their state websites and on their university websites. And we think there might be a little bit of interest in this from the General Assembly and the policy folks, because in the budget last year, there was a small paragraph inserted into each of your budgets in your financial aid section that authorizes you all to use some of your financial aid money for paid internships. And it was just a couple of sentences. It isn't truly a robust state work study program, but we might try to bring some of you together and just think about whether we would want to design and perhaps make recommendations to the General Assembly for what a Virginia state work study program could look like. The ones in other states have less restrictions than the federal work study. And so, we could start talking about, as we work through transforming federal work study, we might come across regulatory barriers, things the federal government doesn't allow you all to do with your federal work study money. And maybe we could design a state work study program that could fund internships that would get around some of those barriers. And then the last thing on the list is some sort of technology for tracking, measuring, and reporting. And there are many aspects to this. If an employer goes through some sort of training or workshops to learn how to do evidence-based internships, we might want to track who completed those, because perhaps there's interest on the policy side of our advisory panel to incentivize those employers by giving them tax credits or some other sort of reward or recognition for completing the training. So we need to be able to track who's doing that. We'd also like to figure out a more standardized way for students to report the internships that they find on their own. If we're going to be thinking about expanding internships by tens of thousands, and we want to say, here's our baseline for how many internships are happening now, I'm not sure we know that. And then how are we going to measure that we meet our goal, whatever that goal might be, if we're not tracking? So that'll be something we'll be asking you all to help us with as well. So the focus of round 3 is to support the readiness of your institution to affordably scale high-quality paid internships and other work-based learning. So we're asking you to, during the course of the grant period, position yourselves, get your policies and practices in place, figure out how you're going to do this so that you'll be ready to dramatically increase the number of internships you can support. So before I get into the nuts and bolts of the application, I'm just going to check the chat box. Okay, we don't have any questions so far. If you have questions, you can type them in and we'll answer them as we go along. So for the grant competition, eligible lead applicants are public institutions of higher ed. Each institution can submit one application. We encourage you to partner with the higher ed centers and institutes if you offer degree programs at those institutes and centers. I have not yet contacted your offices of sponsored programs to let them know that this is limited submission. I know they usually manage that process. and I will do that this afternoon. I think that because this call for proposals went to your presidents first, and then I forwarded it to you all, and we are expecting the application to sort of come from the leadership level at your institution, from the president's office. I don't think there'll be any confusion about getting multiple proposals from the same institution, but I do want to make sure your sponsor programs folks know. It's a 12-month grant. You can request up to $25,000. You don't have to request the full amount if you don't need it, and there's no match required. The required activity is that your president should convene a task force to develop an experiential learning vision for students, determine the priorities that your institution wants to place on the different aspects of that plan, and then begin to design the strategies to implement your highest priority initiatives that are going to be needed to achieve your vision over time. And I'll just say that one of the things that led us to this, to asking you all to set institutional priorities is because some of you are familiar with the 6-year planning process, strategic plan that your institutions submit to us here at State Council. This year there was an added element to that called the Institutional Performance Pilot Projects. And some of your institutions included an internship component to their performance pilot projects. We received applications from you all in the last couple of rounds of competition. Some of you are submitting applications to Go Virginia to fund internships. And then the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative, the regional nodes are also talking about internship opportunities. And what we found is that different projects are being proposed to all of those different aspects and all those different initiatives, different internship programs. And so we'd like to know, when we see 3 or 4 different descriptions of internships from the same institution, we'd kind of like to know how they fit into the whole and what the true institutional priority is, not just what a department or a school thinks is their own priority, but from an institutional level, what are your institutional priorities? So, you know, for limited funding, we just want to make sure we're funding the highest level priorities that your institution has determined from the leadership level. The required deliverable is the comprehensive plan for your institution that you submit to us at the end of the grant period. And again, what you submit to us could be a subset of your whole plan, because again, the study abroad, the extracurricular skills, the skills that students are learning through extracurricular, and even some of the project-based and capstone kinds of experiential learning that you all are doing are not as relevant to us here at the state level. So we're really looking for the work-based learning aspect. And then an additional activity during the grant period, we're going to be asking you all to join us if you would like, to engage with us at the state level for all the things we talked about that had part of the statewide initiative, and also for a focused look at how you're developing your comprehensive plans, what format you might want to put them in, what advice you might have for us if we have future rounds of this grant competition, you know, how we might want to restructure what we're asking for as you go through the process. So the first round of awardees are kind of our guinea pigs in terms of trying to figure out whether this works or not. And any advice you have for future applicants as you go through the process. So during the grant period, we'll be asking you to come to Richmond, I think, for perhaps a half-day meeting. And I did receive a question. The instructions suggest that in your budget you include money to travel to Richmond. And someone asked how many people should travel. We don't think your whole task force needs to come, but maybe, you know, 2, 3, I don't know, 4 people. It depends on your institution and who's on your task force. And if we're talking about the issues that I just mentioned, which is engagement with the chamber and how we're going to be partnering with them, and then also the nuts and bolts of future grant competitions and what you would suggest to future applicants. So those are the sorts of people maybe who could contribute to that, who you would want to travel to Richmond. Proposals are limited to 7 pages, not including the cover sheet, table of contents, summary, the organizational chart of the people who you expect to serve on your task force, and the budget narrative. The actual project description, which is the 7 pages, is a brief history, membership on your task force, the work plan, the milestones, and just a quick conclusion that gives us the compelling reason why we should fund your proposal. So those of you who have competed in previous competitions know that we've decided to score each individual section, but then also allow our reviewers to award impact points. And in the call for proposals, there's a description of the kinds of things that our reviewers are going to be looking at when they award the impact points. Submit applications to me by 11:59 p.m. on whatever date you choose of the 2 due dates. Submit them as a single PDF file if you can. Your budgets could be in Excel, so you could send me 2 files if you want. So that is the end of the formal presentation. We have a couple of questions here. One is, yes. So the question is, will we be sharing the PowerPoint deck? We will post this on our website. Now that this is the end of the 2 sessions, we'll be replacing the information on how to access the webinars with the link to these PowerPoints. And we are recording this session, so a link to a YouTube recording of this session will also be placed there. That's that question. Okay, so for now, that's the end of the chat boxes. You can keep chatting. My friend Wendy Kong has joined us. I don't know if she wants to add anything.
No.
I covered the couple of slides that she would normally do. But I just want to let you know she's here as well. So if you have any questions, you can either shout them out now. If you want to unmute yourself, you can contact me later. You can put them in the chat box. I will say, if you contact me, please do that by email. I have access to email from a couple different devices, and I'll just add a personal note that apparently some scamming robocallers have hijacked my phone number from my desk phone. And so most of the calls I get are from people saying that they have a missed call from my number and they want to know why I called them, when of course I did not. So I don't really answer my phone. Those calls have been slowing down, so hopefully I'll be able to start using my phone again shortly. But definitely email if you have any questions. It's much more reliable for me. Anybody want to jump in with a question? You can talk now if you would like. All right, so let me just tell you a question we received yesterday. The question asked about our interest in virtual or remote internships. There is strong interest in that for a variety of reasons. One of them is the equity and access issue that we talked about earlier in the presentation. Not all students can travel somewhere to do an internship away from either their home or your campus. I know some of you are setting up workspaces with good internet access, high-speed internet access, secure servers for IT students to do remote internships that involve a lot of data that needs to be uploaded and shared with the employer who's located in another region of the state. So there's a lot of interest in remote internships or virtual internships because of the access and equity issue. There's also a second interest in it, which we're still learning about, but the federal government has defined what they're calling hub zones, and these are census tracts around the state. I believe there's over 100 of them that have traditionally been low-income census tract areas. And companies that are located in a hub zone get all sorts of tax credits, some of which relate to hosting interns. And from my understanding, it's not only whether the company is located in a hub zone, but if your institution is located in a hub zone, and your student is participating in an internship from that physical location, even if the employer is outside the hub zone, I believe they get some sort of credit, tax credit. So it kind of works both ways, whether the student or the employer is geographically located in the hub zone. So we're trying to learn more about that because there's a lot of interest on the part of the U.S. Small Business Administration. We have someone from there on our policy advisory panel, and they're very interested in making this connection with universities and making sure you understand that there's an extra value to employers in hub zones. And so as we create our outreach to employers, we want to make sure that they're sort of a special group of employers that we pay a little bit more attention to because of the way their tax credits work. They can do internships much more inexpensively, I think, than some others. That's our interest in virtual or remote internships. So we are interested in those for sure. I think we have a question. Let me scan up and just make sure I didn't miss any. The question is, if we're looking at work study as a focus, could other student employment programs be eligible for a grant? I think that's definitely a question for the future. I'm not sure that will, on campus. Yeah, I'm not sure. So this brings up a bigger issue, right? We're asking you all to create these comprehensive plans for experiential learning with a special focus on work-based learning. We're actually not promising that we're going to be funding everything in your plan or pieces and parts of your plan. We haven't gotten to that point yet. Of course, we're waiting. There's a new 2-year budget cycle coming up. We're not sure what's going to happen with the budget. So in terms of what might be eligible for a grant in the future, we don't know yet. But I think that if a student is working on campus and you have structured it as an internship program that meets all your institutional definitions and criteria and rigor for an internship program, I do think that in some instances that could be just as valid as an experience off campus with an employer, especially if you're in an area that doesn't have a lot of employers in your area who are taking interns. So it's kind of a mixed issue right now. We'll really have to see what you all think in your plans and how you want to approach this for your students. I do know that there's just not a lot of opportunities in some regions of the state, especially I would say for where some community colleges are located. The opportunity for internships in those towns and counties are quite small. So we would definitely think about whether that's a viable avenue for students to get work-based experience. It's not off campus, but it is a real work environment. I mean, you all have people who work at your institutions. Those are real jobs that students, graduates get hired for. So they're just as legitimate as companies. But yeah, we would have to look at that in the future.
Well, and I think we've heard of other institutions, this is Wendy, of some institutions that have really thought about on-campus opportunities as transforming more into a work experience, not just going to get the job and maybe working in the cafeteria, but looking at ways either, I remember in the spring we heard about using work study for working in the finance department. And I think when you had talked about the Clemson group, they had actually looked at transforming their work study on campus.
Yeah, so Clemson University did a lot with this. They transformed a lot of their federal work study on campus jobs into internships, and they had to have the job descriptions approved, the learning outcomes defined. Students were prepared before they went into the internships, just like you would if they were going off campus to a for-profit employer. They were coached and guided throughout the process, and so it was, they really were able to structure those opportunities to really be aligned with the degree program and turn them into formal internships. And then also Wendy was hearing about universities that are using federal work study for research experiences in faculty labs. And so that's an interesting use of federal work study as well. So we're open to all sorts of creative ways to leverage money that's being spent anyway, but using it in a more structured way. And we would hope adding more value to the student for that.
And that's what we're hoping through the institutions that participate in this grant is that they're really, maybe bringing, individuals, students, teams together and kind of digging into each element and brainstorming ideas to really come up with creative opportunities. And that's really how this grant is structured, to really give institutions the flexibility and the time to strategically think about how they could look at a comprehensive approach for work-based learning. They could go broad and do experiential learning. We're very focused on the work-based and the internship component of it, but there's a lot of potential untapped opportunities that may be out there and could be some simple adjustments. So we know that there's others that could be much more difficult, but we really hope that institutions can use these grants to take those opportunities to find those creative and innovative opportunities to bring more to the students.
Thank you. All right, so I think that's it for the questions. I hope you'll email me if any more come up. I'm happy to answer anything that comes up. So thank you all very much for participating, and we're looking forward to seeing your proposals. Thank you.